Welcome to those of you who are joining for the first time and those who were here for our session last week with Jeff Myram from Consumers. I'm Alan Taub. I'm a professor of mechanical and materials engineering at University of Michigan and director of our electric vehicle center. Our center was established in 2023. We received a $130 million grant from the state of Michigan to build on our existing capabilities working with the automotive industry to really expand in 4 areas: education, developing the workforce, technology, as well as improving our on-campus facilities. On the technology side, we've had concentrated first on our on-vehicle technology components. We had 2 workshops that, with our industry partners, have developed our roadmap and are launching our first set of projects. We're now moving on to our next priority area, which is the electric infrastructure and charging technologies. And with that in mind, we've launched these webinars to get our audience grounded in the challenges and opportunities in that regard. So I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Jane McCurry. Jane is the executive director of Clean Fuels Michigan. That is a nonprofit trade association focused on advancing clean mobility industries in Michigan. And in this role, Jane serves on the Michigan Council on Future Mobility and Electrification. I've had the pleasure of interacting with her on that council, and I've really come to value the insights that she brings, not only on the consumer, but on policy and technology and workforce interests. Jane also serves on the boards of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association and Wisconsin Microfinance. She holds a bachelor's of business administration degrees in operations and technology management and environmental studies from the University of Wisconsin. And since we typically beat Wisconsin in football, that's all right. So what I'd like to do is have Jane take us through her seminar as we go forward. What we'll ask people to do is hold off on their questions. We'll go through those at the end of her webinar, and please post them in chat. Plus, at the end, we'll be able to raise your hand to do a question. So with that, and I will remind people we are recording this session, and the recording will be available. With that, I'll turn it over to Jane.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm really excited to be here. I'll go ahead and get my slides queued up, but likewise, it's been really wonderful getting to know Alan and the EV Center through our collaboration on the council and other projects. It's really great to see so many new names in attendance today. So it's really wonderful to meet all of you. Oops, I don't know why my slides are automatically advancing. As Alan said, my name is Jane McCurry. I'm the executive director of Clean Fuels Michigan and the Michigan Clean Fuels Institute, our sister organization. Together, we're a trade association and a charitable nonprofit focused on advancing clean mobility in the state of Michigan. We work really closely with industry partners from utility companies to automakers, charging station manufacturers and operators, fleets, and more. And our work focuses on replacing gasoline and diesel. So any mobility technology that is cleaner than the traditional fuels we're using has a space within Clean Fuels Michigan. That said, a lot of our work does focus on vehicle electrification. And so we have a lot of data and insights into electric vehicle charging, as we know that's a critical enabler for the mobility transition at large. My task today was to give an overview of some statewide perspectives and statewide work that's happening in EV and EV charging. And so I'm going to start by backing us up to 2022, when Governor Whitmer issued an executive order asking the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE, to create a plan to chart Michigan on a path toward a zero carbon economy by 2050. Eagle went to work assembling project teams and creating a plan to say, here are all of the things we need to do across all of the various sectors of our economy to achieve that ambitious goal. And then published a plan in April of 2022, um, which included a section on the transportation sector. And that section is titled Electrify Vehicles and Increase Public Transit. And under that header, there were two specific goals for the transportation sector with this climate lens. And that was to build the infrastructure necessary to support 2 million electric vehicles on Michigan roads by 2030 and increase access to clean transportation options, including public transit, by 15% each year. These are really bold goals. 2 million electric vehicles by 2030. 2030 is not that far away. But I think having North Star bold goals, especially in a plan that's focused on climate, makes a lot of sense. These goals were built upon when the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification issued their first My Future Mobility Plan later in 2022. That plan has multiple pillars and goals, and the ones relevant to our conversation today include the pillar that's titled Provide Safer, Greener, and More Accessible Transportation Infrastructure and Services. And under that header, there are goals to deploy 100,000 EV chargers to support 2 million EVs and improve access to hydrogen infrastructure. So this goal builds upon what was included in the climate plan and puts a number to our EV chargers to say, okay, if we're going to have 2 million EVs, we probably need 100,000 charge ports. I want to be clear, charge ports. So not chargers, not charging stations, but actual plugs that can go into a vehicle in Michigan to support 2 million EVs. They also added a goal that EV charging should maintain at least 80% off-peak charging. So that means charging at points where the grid has excess capacity. Usually that means overnight. So we want to be pushing EV drivers and electric fleets to be charging their vehicles overnight when we have extra space on the grid, so that each incremental unit of electricity being used to charge those vehicles is improving the efficiency of our grid, isn't requiring new and additional electrical resources to be added in the form of, additional power plants and the like. These goals are really critical. They obviously work really closely with the My Healthy Climate Plan and are informed by many stakeholders over many, many months from across Michigan, both residents, industry, government officials. The council that Dr. Alan Taub mentioned, the Council on Future Mobility and Electrification, is made up of stakeholders from the auto industry and educational institutions and had a big hand in setting these goals. And so they're representative of not just government, but industry and many stakeholders, including advocacy stakeholders like Clean Fuels Michigan and some of our partners. This plan is undergoing a sprucing up process, recognizing that this industry is moving really quickly and the plan is 2 years old. So I'm really eager to see how the plan continues to evolve and change as the industry continues to evolve and change. So these are our North Star goals: 100,000 chargers to support 2 million EVs by 2030. Clean Fuels Michigan views kind of the landscape of what needs to happen in clean mobility in 3 pillars. The first pillar is affordable clean vehicles. Obviously, clean mobility requires a vehicle. We need those vehicles to be available in quantities that are sufficient to meet demand. We need those vehicles to be able to do the job that they're being used for, whether that's getting you to work or a garbage truck that can run its route and go back to the depot at the end of the day. And they need to be affordable. They need to be available at prices that the market will bear. We also need robust infrastructure. So each of those vehicles needs a place that it can be charged reliably and at speeds that use case will bear. So again, thinking passenger vehicles, that looks like charging your vehicle at home overnight. It also looks like charging your vehicle on your road trip up north during the summer and being able to charge quickly and have access to multiple reliable chargers. And then finally, we need a capable workforce. We need people in Michigan that are designing, marketing, building, maintaining, and operating these vehicles and charging stations so that everyone can have a great experience, not only to get the technology in their hands, but to make sure that it continues to operate as they expect it to over time. So between vehicles, infrastructure, and workforce, we see these all as very interwoven and critical. We'll hone in mostly today on the infrastructure piece, but obviously I think it's a Venn diagram between the three of these. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing as a state in all three. Starting with vehicles, in Michigan today, we have about 78,000 plug-in electric vehicles registered as of June of this year. That includes plug-in hybrids and full battery electric vehicles. And that number ranks us third in the Midwest. We're currently behind Minnesota and Illinois in terms of sheer number in the Midwest. Actually, I'm sorry, that rank is based on per capita numbers in 2023. But that's compared to 12 states in the Midwest. So, nothing to scoff at, but certainly I think we would all love to see Michigan ranked number one here. And 78,000 electric vehicles is a really big number in a frankly short period of time that vehicles have been readily available on the market. So I think we're doing pretty good in terms of EV adoption. When we look at that in context to Michigan's goals, there are about 8.6 million vehicles registered in Michigan today, according to MDOT. Looking at this year numbers, if we're comparing that to our goal of 2 million EVs, 2 million EVs is approximately 23% of the vehicles that are on our road today. We're at about 1% of the vehicles on the road today are electric currently. So we've got a long way to go. Again, those goals are tied to the year 2030. I think it's a tall order to say that we're going to have the majority of vehicles sold in the state electric in next year and the following year in order to get us all the way up to that 23% on the road number. But I think it's also important to reiterate that it's not an if, it's a when question. So we probably won't reach that goal in 2030, but we will reach it at some point. And preparing the infrastructure today for that inevitable need down the line is really where I'd like to focus our conversation. It's not if, it's when. And there, is a real cost to waiting to build our infrastructure. It's the chicken and the egg question. And if we've got the infrastructure there, people will feel confident that they can drive electric vehicles and will purchase them in greater quantities. I also think it's fun to look at kind of technology adoption more broadly, and especially being in Michigan, looking at what we know from previous advancements in mobility. This is a chart of adoption of the motor vehicle as it replaced horses in the 1900s. And what I think is interesting here is you see adoption of the motor vehicle and adoption of horses increasing very slowly but steadily at the beginning of the chart. And then you see people start to adopt motor vehicles in increasing numbers. You see the hockey stick graph go up right around 2015, or I'm sorry, 1915. And then you see some blips where adoption starts to slow and diminish just a bit, and then increase again, and then slow and diminish just a bit, and increase again. And we know how this ended. I think it's important to think about Michigan's history in this. We are a place where the automotive industry was born and continues to thrive. We've done this before, and we'll do it again as we replace internal combustion engines with electric vehicles. This trend line is not just for adoption of the motor vehicle, but pretty much any new technology follows this very similar S-curve of adoption, where you see slow growth at first as people get familiar with the technology and the technology continues to improve. You see exponential growth in the middle of this adoption curve as people get more comfortable with the technology and as mass market adoption starts to push prices down so the technology becomes more accessible to more people. And then up at the top, you see market saturation, growth start to slow. You've reached kind of your late adopters at that point. Almost everyone already has the technology. We're somewhere down at the beginning of this graph in between slow growth and that exponential growth. it'll be really interesting to see how sharp a vertical the S curve of electric vehicle technology looks in hindsight. But I think we're just starting to hit that mass market adoption, exponential growth space, and so it's a really exciting time to be in the industry as we're really starting to figure things out in that mass market world. So what will it take to get to those 2 million EVs? Obviously, we'll dig more into the infrastructure and the workforce pieces, but thinking specifically about the vehicles, we've got a lot of education to do. And that's why the EV Center is so important. Opportunities like this to talk about the value of electrification, make sure consumers know that people in their community are driving EVs, that EVs are available for fleets and in SUVs and in pickup trucks, and just making sure that there's really good available knowledge around EVs, especially in the wake of this political rhetoric that we saw in the last presidential election. There was a lot of money spent on political ads in Michigan that were bashing EVs. And the fact is, new technology isn't political. It's about innovation. It's about jobs remaining in Michigan. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to just get really good information out to consumers and policymakers, and decision makers in local businesses too. And then we also need to see those prices continue to fall. But the critical piece, and the piece that I'm really excited to talk about today, is the infrastructure. So looking again at numbers, where are we at in Michigan in terms of EV charging infrastructure deployment? We've got about 3,600 public charge ports in Michigan. So again, those are the charge ports, the plugs, not the stations. So those are at multiple charge ports, likely per physical site, maybe multiple charge ports per device. So you can see a device with multiple chargers on it. But about 36,000 ports that are publicly accessible within the state of Michigan. And again, that ranks us third in the Midwest. So nothing to scoff at. We've got work to do to be a true leader in the Midwest here. But luckily, a lot of that work is already happening. These are screenshots from PlugShare, which is an app where chargers are posted. You can use it to navigate to chargers. EV drivers can share that they successfully used a charger, or maybe that the charger wasn't working, and alert other EV drivers about that. It's a really useful app. I'm sure, chime in the chat if you use PlugShare, if you have other favorite apps that other drivers or potential EV drivers could use. But these were screenshots from just last week showing each of these dots is a public charging station. On the left, you've got DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers. So those are, your big refrigerator-looking DC fast chargers. Charge your vehicle in less than 45 minutes, plus all of your level 2s, the slightly slower chargers that you'll want to leave your car plugged into for a few hours at a time. And then on the right, you've got just your DC fast chargers. So that's what you need when you're on a road trip or taking a longer trip across the state and need to charge up really quickly. You can tell where we have our major corridors by following the lines of those dots, mostly going north up through the state, and you can see a significant density of chargers in the Grand Rapids and Metro Detroit area. So even with the infrastructure we have today, rest assured there are chargers nearby, and there are many more coming too. FHWA estimates that approximately 1,000 new public chargers are added each week across the nation. So 1,000 new public charge ports every week. That's really incredible. This graph is a little bit outdated, but I think it's demonstrative of this growth in the charging industry and the availability of charge ports, whether it's at a grocery store, at a gas station, along the highway, or in a community, in a neighborhood, so that you can charge your car overnight if you don't have a garage to put a charger in. We need chargers in all of those locations, and we're seeing that growth over time too. And a lot of that growth is thanks to policy that's making it easier and more cost-effective to install chargers. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is a federal bill that was signed into law in November of 2021 and created more than $1 trillion in funding for transportation and infrastructure across the nation. It created the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which I'll talk a little bit more about. That's also called NEVI, which is readily deploying high power, easily accessible charging infrastructure to create a backbone of fast chargers to inspire range confidence in EV drivers. And then we also have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is another federal law signed in August of 2022. It's the single largest investment in clean mobility in the nation's history and created a whole slew of federal tax credits and clean energy incentive programs that Michigan has done a really wonderful job of drawing into our state. I think there's some question marks as to which pieces of these will continue to be long lasting as power changes in Washington, D.C. next year. But the fact remains that the ball is rolling downhill in terms of EV deployment and EV charging infrastructure deployment. And these programs were really influential in getting that kickstarted and creating the resources available to make these investments. And Michiganders, Michigan fleets, Michigan drivers should continue to keep an eye on the programs that were created from these two bills, as they're opportunities that will likely be available at least for some time. One to really hone in on is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or the NEVI program, as I mentioned. That program is both formula and competitive. So the formula piece means that FHWA wrote some complicated formula that said, Michigan, you get $110 million to spend on public charging. That money has to be spent on deploying DC fast chargers along alternative fuel corridors in Michigan. Each site has to have 4 chargers that are at least 150 kilowatts in power, which means that they're high power chargers, they're redundant. So in case one charger goes down or there are several other drivers at the site, you've got 4 options of plugs to charge at. And Michigan has already started spending this money, which is really exciting. So you can see the NEVI Round 1 selections in the map on the left here. The lines in green are alternative fuel corridors, and the little circles are sites that were funded in that first round. Many of these sites are continuing to work through their construction planning phases. I do believe there's at least one that has broken ground and will likely be commissioned in the next few days. So we should see the very first one of these projects energized soon. And round 2 is open now. So there are an additional 43 gaps along those alternative fuel corridors that will be filled with awards next year. And then after that, after every 50 miles along each of those alternative fuel corridors are filled, Michigan can flexibly spend the rest of this money. So there could be something like $50 million left in this pot that can be used to deploy infrastructure that is not along an alternative fuel corridor, for example, in communities or up in the thumb area where we don't have large interstates to be deploying those corridor chargers at. So this is a really important program. MDOT has done a really wonderful job of working through all of the competitive bidding and unique project criteria that EV chargers pose, and is a huge opportunity that's deploying infrastructure all across Michigan, including in the Upper Peninsula, which is really critical. We want to make sure that EVs aren't just accessible to people who live in big cities, but are available to even Michiganders who live in rural and remote areas. I want to hone in on some of the nuance and frankly difficulty of bringing a charging station to life. Those NEVI charging stations, again, 4 ports with 150 kW each, that's a really big charging station that requires a lot of different collaborators. Collaboration is so critical in this space because you're bringing together different technology providers, different experts, and folks who typically haven't had to work together in the past. The bullet points on this slide is a direct screenshot from MDOT's NEVI website. that's indicating who should be on a project team to apply for these NEVI sites. So you've got your charger hardware and software vendor. They can be the same company. They don't have to be. You could have a consultant, a contractor, an electrician. Who's going to actually install and trench and put this charger in the ground. You've got folks who provide operations and maintenance, who's going to make sure that the charger is operational, because another critical component of NEVI sites is that their uptime is at least 97%. So 97% of the time, if someone pulls up to that charger, it must be working. So you need people that are focused on keeping that charger working. Likely the owner of that charger isn't anyone that I've mentioned before. It could be another company entirely. You also have a site host if you're thinking about a grocery store or a gas station. That grocery store or gas station, they could just be leasing that land to the charging owner. And then, of course, you have your utility company. Who's going to be providing the electrons and hooking that charger up to the grid? And you need all of these different stakeholders to be working together on the same page, working on the same timelines, communicating really clearly, not only to go after and secure that funding, but to make sure that the charger is installed appropriately to all of the grant specifications, to safety specifications, and then available to the public. That's not to say that it's not done, right? We saw all of those green dots on the maps. There are plenty of chargers out there that are wonderful to use, but just to say that what goes on behind the scenes to install this infrastructure is sometimes very complicated and requires a lot of different stakeholders to be collaborating. And so spaces where those stakeholders can come together like this is really critical so that everyone's using the same language and has the same baseline of information to start the conversation with. So NEVI is primarily focused on DC fast chargers, and those are critically needed, right? We need that backbone of infrastructure so that you can get anywhere you need to go in your vehicle and trust that you can pull off the highway and find that fast charger and refuel when you need to. But I think it's also really critical to note, and again, looking back at the goal in the My Future Mobility Plan, that more than 80% of charging happens at home overnight. So if you have a garage where you can upgrade your electrical system and charge your vehicle, just like you charge your phone overnight, you get home, you plug your vehicle in, you time it to charge overnight. Driving an EV is really easy. But for multifamily residents, people who live in low income or older neighborhoods, or homes that weren't built with excess electrical capacity on the box, upgrading to be able to put a level 2 charger in your garage may be a little bit more cost effective or cost prohibitive, and maybe require larger upgrades. There are also a lot of neighborhoods in Michigan that simply don't have driveways or garages. So we call those driveway and garage orphans. And it's just a little bit harder to drive an electric vehicle for folks who aren't able to charge their vehicle wherever they're parking it overnight. And so focusing on community-based level 2 charging to facilitate that overnight experience for people who don't own or have a garage where a charger is readily available is really important too. There is a side of the NEVI program. We have the formula program, putting those DC fast chargers all across the state. We also have the competitive program, which is called the Charger and Fueling Infrastructure, or CFI program, that is specifically focused on deploying infrastructure in communities to facilitate that overnight charging. And luckily, we've had really great success in Michigan. Kudos to the city of Detroit, the city of Lansing, and the city of Ann Arbor, who have all applied for and won those community charging dollars. And so we'll see a lot more community charging in those cities in order to, again, provide not only DC fast, but level 2 chargers to facilitate electric vehicle charging in community. I also want to shout out our utility programs. Every major utility and many of the small utilities across Michigan have really excellent rebates and incentives, not only to help drivers purchase their electric vehicle, but to help them charge their electric vehicle and charge their vehicle in the most cost-effective manner. This screenshot on the left here is from Clean Fuels Michigan's website. We have a fact sheet that lists all of the utility programs across the state. And so if you're ever looking for more resources, please feel free to check out cleanfuelsmi.org. And this is on our resources page. So you can link out directly, try and find your utility on there and then link directly to their page. So even with all this activity happening, we've got federal programs working with state agencies, we've got utility programs deploying infrastructure across our communities. We know that there's still a long way to go to get to 2 million EVs and 100,000 charge ports in Michigan. And so Clean Fuels Michigan spent the better part of this year working with Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council and many of our members, stakeholders, partners, and other state agencies to put together a roadmap for how do we get there? What state policy actions are needed to get to 2 million EVs and 100,000 charging stations? It is a very large report. It's well over 100 pages. We distilled it into 6 key recommendations that I'll talk through today. But again, lots of information in this report, including more data on where we're at in Michigan, where we're going, and opportunities to continue to make progress at the state level in transportation electrification. So I'll talk about a few of the policies that we mentioned in the report. And then again, would love to send you to the report if you want to learn more. I'm happy to answer questions. But the first policy we recommended is that Michigan adopt a clean fuel standard. A clean fuel standard supports a diversified transportation fuel market. It's a market-based policy that requires reducing the average carbon intensity or emissions from transportation fuels over time. So the standards set any fuel provider that's providing more carbon intensive or a fuel with more greenhouse gas emissions than the standard generates deficits, and they have to purchase from credit generators. So in essence, it's a market-based policy that provides big carrots for those who are putting clean fuels into the marketplace. Those clean fuels could be, really biofuels, hydrogen, it could be any fuel. But because of how clean electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging is, it creates a lot of incentive for the EV marketplace. And we see this as being a really critical enabler for widespread EV charging. The second set of policies to highlight today are all related to our utility companies. We've got some policies here around passing legislation to enable utilities to do longer term planning for their transportation electrification programs and investments. We want to make sure that utilities can conduct EV load forecasting so that they know how many EVs are going to be in their territory, when will they charge, and do we need to adjust our infrastructure or our power generation in order to meet that anticipated demand? And then how do we make investments to adjust accordingly? If we know that there is likely to be a fleet that will electrify in this general area, can we start to bolster the infrastructure in that location by procuring or deploying transformers or upgrading wiring or any slew of activities that can make it easier when that fleet does decide to place their order for 50 electric vehicles? And then finally, again, utility programs have been super important in providing rebates for electric vehicle charging equipment, both in public and in residences. And so, the bottom line here is there's a host of activities that our utilities are already doing and can continue to grow to make sure that they're supporting the EV adoption curve. And there are policy changes to make it easier for them to do that. And then finally, EV readiness is another really critical policy. We've spent a lot of time at the council talking about EV readiness, in particular as it relates to multifamily residents. Essentially, what EV ready means is that as buildings and parking lots are built, they should be built with the capability to host a charger in the future. So that looks like an electrical panel that has space on it. That looks like conduit being placed in parking lots so that you don't have to trench through that parking lot in a few years when you decide you want to put a charger there. It reduces the burden and the expense of adding infrastructure in the future if you build your parking lots and your buildings with the capability of hosting those technologies in the future. So EV readiness is a provision that can be added to our building code in Michigan. There are many communities, municipalities that have passed parking ordinances that implement EV readiness at the community level. But in order to make that statewide, it has to be a statewide building code change. And so we're recommending that the state seriously consider adding EV readiness the next time that the building codes are updated to make sure that our built environment is future-proof for electric vehicle charging too. And then finally, and I'll go through these last slides pretty quickly, capable workforce. Again, knowing that in Michigan, about 20% of our total workforce is tied to the mobility industry in some way. We want to make sure that Michiganders are ready and prepared to grow or transition into the clean transportation industry. And Michigan already has a very robust clean mobility workforce with almost 35,000 people employed in clean transportation and clean fuels in Michigan. And many more expected as we see EV assembly and battery assembly plants come online in Michigan and see more infrastructure deployed. Another shameless plug to Clean Fuels Michigan Resources. We have this EV Career Pathways report that Chase Atanasio on our team wrote in conjunction with many of our members. Pictured here is a EV SE or EV charging station technician training happening at Michigan Central with one of our members, Charger Help. These are individuals that are being trained on how to diagnose and fix electric vehicle chargers when they go down. And so, there's a whole host of professions in, kind of blue collar, green collar workforce that's going to be needed to facilitate the transition to electrification. And that's really what this Career Pathways report looks at. So we're excited to see these opportunities be available to Michiganders and in increasing numbers. This map is showing investment from some of those federal bills that I mentioned earlier, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, showing almost $20 billion of investment in Michigan just over the past few years. More than half of the investments listed on this slide have happened in the year since the IRA passed. So again, just showing the power of productive and compelling policy to create real business investment and move the industry forward. Another quick note that fleets are really important. I think when we talk about electric vehicles, what comes to mind is a passenger electric vehicle. Fleets are hugely important because they drive a lot of miles, and that means that there's a lot more benefit, both from a cost saving and an air quality perspective. Especially as we see EVs continue to come to market at those higher price points, fleets are a great opportunity to make sure that everyone is benefiting from transportation electrification, not just those who are purchasing new vehicles. School buses are a really good example of this. I have a ton of electric school buses being ordered and deployed in Michigan. By a ton, I mean 315, which is a ton by comparative standards to a few years ago in the states around us. And so we want to continue to look at fleets that are really good use cases for electric vehicles and make sure that we're supporting them in procuring those EVs and having really great case studies and success with deploying those vehicles in all areas of the state. These electric school buses are, as far north as Pellston. They drove the school bus across the Mackinac Bridge a few months ago, and then also in our more urban communities. So again, fleets, really, really important too. We also wrote a report on how do we use NEVI to power fleet electrification. And we can do this by designing those NEVI sites really thoughtfully, making sure that larger vehicles can fit in the parking spots and ideally pull through those parking spots so that if they don't need to back up a school bus in a busy parking lot, or if you're using your Ford F-150 to tow your camper, you can just pull through instead of having to back out. But again, lots of great resources on our website. I'm going to wrap up now. Um, I hope I'm doing okay on time. Awesome. Thanks, Alan. So these slides with data that I showed, these numbers that are in colors throughout my slide deck, are screenshots from our new Clean Mobility dashboard that we published just about a month ago. Again, it goes through our pillars of work: robust infrastructure, affordable clean vehicles, and capable workforce, and provides a snapshot on where Michigan is at in our progress toward leading the clean mobility transition. I encourage you to take a look and let us know what other data it might be helpful for us to source and report on in that dashboard. Um, the purpose of it is to give us a snapshot on how we're doing and then identify some of those critical policies to bring us up to that leadership level. So with that, I will pause. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thanks so much, Jane, for an outstanding overview and
Would you stop
showing,
sharing your screen, please, Jane?
Sure.
yeah,
Yep.
showing the progress that's been made. There's already one question in the chat, but for others, you could either post in chat or feel free to use the raise hand function of Teams. So first one's from Jim Vogt, who, by the way, is one of our advisors on our advisory council. What is Clean Fuel's role in spending the funds that are now available?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have been very involved in many of the programs that are available. I would say NEVI comes to mind most. That's what I talked about mostly today. Our role is in communicating industry needs and perspectives to policymakers and implementers at the state level. So we meet regularly with the teams at Eagle and MDOT to facilitate information flow, both from those teams to our members to say, hey, they're going to open NEVI round 2 soon, get ready. Or, hey, there's this charging program that Eagle's going to launch. What thoughts do you have on how it should be designed? And then bring those comments back to the department. So we're involved to that capacity. Clean Fuels Michigan isn't typically writing grants or applying for federal programs. We are more of a connector and a source for folks to come find collaborative solutions and share information.
Okay, there are a few more questions coming in. One is, will the PowerPoint PDF file be available? We will post the recording. Jane, I don't know, we can make it available if you're willing to do that.
I'm totally fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Daniel has a three-part question. First is Clean Fuels advocating for a statewide EV incentive?
We would love for there to be a statewide EV incentive. Clean Fuels Michigan has been really active in the state budget appropriations process for several years now, and that's the process where legislators look at, all of the various revenues and expenditures for the state and decide what programs should we be funding each year. And for several years, we have said that an EV incentive would be really helpful in bringing adoption numbers up. That said, the legislature hasn't been all that interested in doing that. And so we've changed our tune a little bit, and we're focusing now on fleets, again, because there's the community benefit, especially when we're thinking about deploying fleets in a municipal government fleet, deploying a vehicle in a school bus fleet. There's a direct cost savings to the local government, to the community. And so we were really influential in getting a large investment in Michigan's clean school buses. $125 million of state dollars were invested in a clean school bus program that the Michigan Department of Education is currently running. And then we're also asking for a clean fleets program to do something similar, but for local government and small business fleets. So yes, we see a lot of value in EV incentives. We think maybe fleets is an area where we can get a little bit more political traction for now.
Second part of the question is part of Clean Fuel's agenda advocacy for online sales of EVs versus, I'll go quote, skipping dealers who are resistant to selling EVs, or are you seeing dealers getting increasingly on board carrying them on their lot?
That's not part of Clean Fuels Michigan's policy platform. Obviously, we would love for it to be very easy to purchase new electric vehicles, and in many cases, I think it is, and it's getting easier as we have more adoption and more salespeople and dealerships are offering vehicles and knowledgeable on those vehicles. Um, I don't know that I can speak to the specifics, but I do talk to and see at industry events representatives from local dealers that are there and there to learn because they see this as a big opportunity.
And third part, does Clean Fuels see an approach or a benefit to consolidating or standardizing the EV charging apps? This Daniel says he has several on his phone. I knew I do as well. Now I'm going to add the new one you just showed me. Uh, what do you think is the right strategy? Uh, is it?
Yeah. Again, this isn't really part of our platform. I think that's part of being an EV driver right now as an early adopter is downloading all the apps and knowing you're going to have to be a little patient when you go to a new charger and figure out how to use it and create an account. I think EV drivers banding together and sharing good information is the solve here. And I also think ultimately there will be a technology provider that does it better than the rest. In Google Maps, you can see chargers now. So it's becoming more mainstream. And I think as more and more people drive electric vehicles, it'll get easier and easier.
Yeah. Prasad from Car. Prasad, you want to just go off mute or do you want me to read it? Actually, I'm not sure how to take someone in the audience off mute, so I'll do it. First, thank you for the talk. And one of the problems they're studying at CAR is trying to assess quote unquote plant risk. Um, how does the work you're doing at Clean Fuels help what's informing state or local economic developers about the job opportunities or small, medium-sized business transformation? Meaning, when you put a automotive plant in, the leverage on jobs is tremendous. And how do you see Clean Fuels playing in that regard?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I agree that it is hugely important. Clean Fuels Michigan is a really small team. There's three of us. We're primarily focused on policy levers. How do we educate policymakers in Lansing to deploy more clean mobility technology in the near term? There are other groups that do really amazing economic development work, and that's their bread and butter. I'm thinking like Mish Auto. I think they would have a really wonderful answer to this question. Um, in kind of the workforce development, economic development space, we've decided to focus on low barrier to entry careers that we've outlined in that EV career pathways report. Technicians, people who are working on the assembly line to build batteries or assemble electric vehicles. And what do we need potential workers to know about those careers and what skills do they actually need? And we know that we'll need a lot of electricians, but we don't necessarily need an EV charger diagnostic technician to be a registered and licensed, journeyman electrician. So that's what we've tended to focus on just because we see that as a gap and there are other groups doing, really good work in this space, but want to continue working with them, working with CAR, working with Alan's team to develop the industry and get more involved there.
Thanks, Jane. I don't know when the camera went off, but my white mic came on. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Prasad.
And there's Matt points out the plug and charge protocol addressing the apps. Let me just finish up the last question from Chris. If someone is working with stakeholders, be it municipalities, schools, fleets, on their strategy, would you want to be introduced into the conversation and how should they make that happen?
Yes, please. My email is on the last page of my slides, or find me on LinkedIn. I would love to chat more.
So the questions are still coming in. we'll be posting the whole session in the chat. And Jane, if you choose to respond to them directly or add it to our post, this would be great. But on behalf of, I hope, the whole audience, it's always hard to do the virtual applause, but wonderful session. Really, again, helping us set the stage for the challenges and opportunities in electrifying, particularly in the States. So I'll do the order one, but again, thank you. So we'd like to just quickly go through a couple of things before we close the session. Number one, this is now the second in our third series on infrastructure and electrification. Jamie, if you have the slide. And so Richard Mueller from DTE will give the third session next week. And then we have a special presentation from Professor Keolian on how the grid and its CO2 emissions are impacting the total CO2 picture for vehicle electrification. And he's just released a study that he'll be going through. I'll already preview the tagline: in every county in the US, in every electrified vehicle, you are reducing the CO2 footprint. The grid determines by how much. The other thing I'd ask everyone to do is please mark on your calendar the evening of April 1st and April 2nd for our annual symposium. It will be in Ann Arbor on our campus. We've lined up a really good, strong set of speakers. It is free to attend, and you can go to our website, or if you can quickly capture the code there. And also strongly encourage everybody to sign up to be an affiliate of the center. If you haven't done that, you'll get our announcements, follow us on LinkedIn, etc. So again, I'd like to thank Jane for a marvelous presentation, and looking forward to seeing a lot of you again next week for the presentation by DTE. Thank you all.